Dá méobh gá láimh de chruach ag fearr, nó díreamid sa lámh. Ach muna bhfuil crí treide aige, ní chreiceadh sé an bár. Béidir go bhfuil dá níodan aige, agus láidearach tar cían. Glicis thar an tíal aige, nó có lúfar leis an ghuí. Béidir go bhfuil commas mór aige, nó ré mar fancy dan. Ach gan féin creidir ná crí treide, níor maithis ar beitheann. Ní gá misneach a bheith ag donnálaí amháin, ach is fiar dúna lig atá ag strachairt leis an tíal. Ach nóair atá an síl go domhan, is an bád a gur faoi go tappaí. Tóthaí crí cróg go slánmuid, más fada nó gar an báta.
This is the story of one of the great boxers of the 20th century. Fighter, politician, poet. Johnny Kilbane was featherweight champion of the world for 11 years. His is an epic rags-to-riches tale that begins on the west coast of Ireland, on Achill Island.
The Kilbanes came from Ulster and North Leitrim. I would think at the time of the Cromwellian and Ulster plantations. And they came then to the townland of Carrowgarrow, which means rough quarter, because it's very rocky, but they were quite close to the sea for having the fertiliser, the rack and the seaweed to put on their land. In the townland of Carrowgarrow in 1854, there were up to 20 families, including 2 or 3 Kilbanes, McLaughlins, Duggans.
They were kind of nomadic. They travelled widely, I'd say, until they finally settled down here in Achill. Cultivated the land and made a beautiful job of it, and the landlord was so delighted that he said, oh, I'll have that for myself. And he evicted them.
Up until 1850, the landlords of Achill and Achillbeg were the O'Donnells of Newport. And then after the famine, that portion of Achill was bought by William Pike. And he decided it would be more profitable to have cattle reared on his lands in places where we call Bunafoya today and Carrowgarrow, rather than depend on rents from tenants who could barely afford to pay the rent.
Evicted from their home, the Kilbanes fled to the nearby island of Achillbeg, Little Achill, where life got even harder.
Work was very hard on the island because they have no turf, and that was the biggest problem. They had to bring turf all the way from Sala by boat, and the turf had to be handled so many times. By the time it was put onto a boat and off a boat and then carried over to the village, and the village is in the centre of the island. And life was difficult comparing to other parts, so they decided to leave.
From Achill Island, the next point west is America, and people have sailed from this island to the New World from before the days of the famine. In 1870, John J. Kilbane joined the constant stream of emigrants who left Achill looking for a better life. Cleveland, Ohio, and the banks of Lake Erie has attracted Irish emigrants since the early 1830s. The city's Irish families are well established and have played a key role in Cleveland's past. And when your great-grandfather was a world champion boxer, that history is more colourful than most.
In 1993, my grandmother died, and as we were cleaning out her house and her garage, we found several trunks and several old suitcases full of mementos and memorabilia of Johnny and Johnny's life. It was really a treasure trove of items that we found, and really helped me launch a curiosity that I had to learn more about Johnny and his life. Hi, Margaret.
Hey, Kat.
Good to see you.
Great to see you.
Really excited to see what you found about Kilbane.
There's these early John Kilbanes on Pearl. Who knows who those people
Right.
are? Then there's no Johns until 1882, and then there's like 4 Johns. You know, Detroit, Division, Hanover, and Washington.
Hanover. That's Johnny's birth certificate said they lived on Hanover, I think. They lived 94 Hanover when Johnny was born in 89.
There's a particularly strong collection of records from Ackle Island. A gentleman by the name of William Masterson, a Clevelander, after he retired, went back frequently to Ireland and transcribed records, baptismal records, marriage records, census records before they were available online. And he has about 19 volumes of records from Ackle and neighboring parishes. It's very strong and localized to here in Cleveland, which is not surprising given the strong connections between Cleveland and Ackle all around.
I got a mule, her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker, a good old pal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal.
From the first days of the expansion of large cities like New York and Boston along the eastern seaboard, a recurring problem was that of transportation between the coastal ports and the continent's vast interior. Areas like the Ohio Valley were rich grain-producing areas, but it was totally impractical to carry such crops over land. With no natural waterways available, the solution was a great canal.
Everybody down, low bridge, 'cause
The Erie Canal construction was started on the Ohio and Erie Canal in 1825. The idea was to connect Lake Erie here in Cleveland all the way down to the Ohio River. And Irish immigrants began arriving.
Get up there south, we've passed that lock, 15 miles on the Erie Canal.
The Western Reserve Historical Society has a fabulous collection of actual pay vouchers that were made over to the bosses of work gangs. And among the Irish names of these bosses are some Ackle names. You see Hugh McNamara and Gallagher were the boss names. And the $128 that they received would have gone to their whole gang of workers, which may have been as many as 20 workers.
Our day, filled with lumber, coal and hay.
What you have to remember as well is these canals are being built, largely by blood, sweat and tears and by picks. There's no machinery. It has to be done by manual labour. And who supplies this? The vast majority of the canal system, including the Erie Canal system, is done by Irishmen.
You'll always know your pal if you've ever navigated on the Erie Canal.
After the canal came the railways, and Cleveland enjoyed a prime location as a transportation hub on the Great Lakes. The city developed as a commercial centre, with vast shipments of iron ore and coal moving through its ports. It was a rough town that needed hard men for hard work, and this is where Cleveland's links with Ackle Island begin.
Communities like those in Ackle, they were very, very hard workers. Hence the reason going to those areas such as Cleveland, in which there was a demand for labour and also a demand in particular for unskilled labour. So it is to the canals and to the railways that these immigrants flocked to.
The rate of emigration increased dramatically with the onset of the famine, and with a solid network of Ackle Islanders already established in Cleveland, the city offered a new home for those desperate to escape the grim realities of life in Ireland. People like John J. Kilbane.
Johnny's father was born in Ireland and immigrated. His mother was Mary Gallagher. She was born in the Cleveland area, although her family was also from the Achill area.
It was the custom that when a man went over and got work and got some dollars together and got established, he would send for a brother, a cousin, a neighbour, and more often than not, he would also send the fee, the cost of travelling across the Atlantic.
For those arriving from Achill Island, Cleveland was a different world. From the windswept cliffs of Ireland's Atlantic coast to a claustrophobic corner of Cleveland's west side, known as the Angle.
In order to accommodate the great influx of people, the amount of work, they actually subdivided the lots. They're smaller lots than lots in other parts of the city. So there was a lot of congestion.
Conditions were not very good at all. Just built shacks as quickly as they could to try to keep the cold out. Tar paper shacks and shanties. It was tightly compacted, and one newspaper story wrote on how there was a fence around it that outsiders really couldn't go into the Angle but through this one hole in the fence, nor did they want to go into the Angle.
Most of the Achill Islanders who settled in Cleveland lived in a small area of the Angle around St. Malachy's Church that became known as Achill Patch, and it was here on an April day in 1889 that Johnny Kilbane was born.
Johnny had a pretty rough early life. His mother died when he was about 3 years old. His father became blind when he was about 6. He had a stroke and was unable to really work after that point in time. So at a very young age, Johnny had to drop out of school to support the family.
I was probably the skinniest kid in the parish. I scarcely made a shadow when the sun shone. For a time, I worked on the docks, and then I got a job working as a line switch boy for the railways. I couldn't throw the switches by my hands alone. I had to throw my entire body on the bars and bounce up and down to throw them. It must be confessed, I was not rapidly becoming a millionaire.
With a family to support while still a boy himself, Johnny turned to the two pursuits that offered Irish immigrants of this time a route out of the ghetto: sports and entertainment.
Johnny was a special person. When he was at school, his eye was on the stage. He was a singer, he played the violin, he loved dancing, and he was a very good dancer, which of course helped him in his boxing career later on. And also he was very taken with gymnastics.
The parish was very concerned with trying to keep the kids occupied and off the streets, and the LaSalle Club, which was associated with St. Malachy's, was a place where they had a boxing ring, and was one of the earliest places that Johnny Kilbane, learned how to fight officially.
By the latter half of the 19th century, boxing was beginning to establish itself as a working man's sport in America's fast-growing cities. And in these early years, the Irish dominated the prize ring.
In the early 20th century, the average person worked a 6-day week. They only had off on Sunday. The average work day was 10 to 12 hours, not 8 hours. They had much less free time and didn't have really time to participate in leisure sports like tennis and golf, etc. But they did follow the fighters.
One of the great things about America was that what you could do wasn't down to where you came from or your class. If you did it, you were accepted and acknowledged. And one of the areas that the Irish excelled in was to do with sport, both in athletics and specifically in boxing.
Boxing was widely popular from both perspective of people listening to the fights on radio, but also attending the fights. So the biggest attractions would be reserved for the outdoor ballparks, where they would have huge crowds, 40, 50, 60,000 people, which would be almost incomprehensible today.
And towards the end of the 19th century, there were certain boxers like Jim Corbett, Tom Sharkey, who were major figures in the boxing. And it wasn't coincidental that one of the specific reasons why Johnny chose boxing was because in 1906-07, Tom Sharkey from Dundalk, he arrived in Cleveland and gave an exhibition in which Johnny attended, and he was absolutely smitten with the bug. The glamour, the romance, the attention this man was given, and he says himself in his own account, that's what turned him into a boxer.
I decided I was going to be a boxer, so I confided my secret to a friend. He told me, "If you are in earnest, I will give you a note to Jimmy Dunn. He's down at Crystal Beach. If you can fight, he will soon find it out, and if you can't, he won't be half as long."
Jimmy was training for a fight about 20 miles outside of Cleveland. Johnny, he didn't have the 30 cents to get on the train, so his good friend lent him the 30 cents so he could get on the train and go out to see Jimmy Dunn. When he got out there, Jimmy's sparring partners weren't able to go. And so Jimmy said, well, if there's anybody in the crowd that would be willing to spar with me just so I could do a demonstration or exhibition, I'd be happy to do that. Johnny's pals from the West Side volunteered him to do that. So he went in for a couple rounds and sparred, and Jimmy was impressed, even though he was very raw, that he was quick and had a good aptitude for boxing. And Johnny told him how serious he was about being a boxer, and so Jimmy started training him. Eventually it got to the point where Jimmy knew that he had such a great talent for it that he quit boxing himself, even though he was a very prominent boxer himself, just so he could focus on training Johnny. It was very critical that he had met Jimmy Dunn, that they had partnered up and had a long relationship. Even though they were only 6 or 8 years apart, Johnny viewed him almost as a father figure. He really took care of him, handled all his business affairs for the fights, but really showed him how to be a champion.
Under Dunn's tutelage, Johnny started boxing as a professional, and he set about fighting all the other tough guys in and around his weight in Cleveland.
I fought Kid Campbell, and much to my surprise, I knocked him out in the third. After the fight, Jimmy Dunn called me to one side and said, "Johnny, why don't you quit railroading and take up fighting for good? You're cut for it," he said. I looked back and realized that it was only the word of someone like Dunn that I was waiting for, a word of encouragement before plunging into the ring forever.
But just as Johnny was about to embark on his new career, there was another Kilbane in town with similar aspirations. Tommy Kilbane was no relation. In fact, he and Johnny didn't really like each other. They were born on the next street and seemed to have been rivals from birth.
They actually became pretty fierce rivals. They fought a couple times where they were more or less a draw, and because they had both become quite famous locally, they decided that they really needed one brawl to settle it all. And at the time, boxing was illegal in the Cleveland area. And so what they did was they arranged to have a barn just outside of Cleveland that they would go to and have a 25-round fight.
Around 500 people filled the room, light being furnished by 4 dim oil-burning lamps hanging from the ceiling. All windows being nailed down tight, the place soon filled with cigarette and cigar smoke. The air was stifling. It was a slam-bang affair. We just punched, mauled, and battled each other all around the small space. What a lacing we each suffered. Then, the 23rd, I let fly with a right flush to Tommy's jaw. Down he went. He barely got to his feet at 9. On the strength of the knockdowns I scored on the 23rd round, I was given the decision and a purse of $408. Before the match, I weighed 119¼ pounds. When it was over, I was down to 112.
The business of prize fighting and earning a living with his fists became increasingly important when Johnny married his childhood sweetheart, Irene MacDonald. Now he was fighting for his family.
Irene McDonnell and I had known each other since we were small children. We went to school together at St. Malachi's Parish, and back that far we knew our lives were destined to go together forever. Our firstborn, Mary, arrived in 1911, and 2 years later, in 1913, little Helen was born.
Johnny Kilbane's early boxing career was largely confined to fighting in clubs in and around the Cleveland area. He built up a reputation as a leading featherweight, and the newspapers were starting to write of him as a legitimate contender for a shot at the title.
In 1907, his official pro career started, and he met everybody and anybody. He fought a lot of good fighters, former champs, then soon-to-be champs. He was a very active fighter.
Johnny was an intelligent fighter, a guy that, not being just a raw, gutty guy, but a guy who could use his brains and the science of boxing to win fights. He would hit you and wouldn't get hit, but he had great power also, tremendous right hand, and knocked out fighters who had never been stopped before.
Johnny fought his way through the ranks of America's leading featherweights, but this was a time when the division was dominated by one of the great champions. Abe Attell had first won the world title as an 18-year-old back in 1901, and he was the first in a long line of great Jewish fighters who came to dominate the lighter divisions in boxing at this time.
Attell was a funny kind of a guy. He did a lot of business, of course. He was, to a large extent, a corrupt individual. He was a real man of the streets, I would say. In other words, a hustler. This is a real operator.
Boxing is a tale of ethnic secession in America. When you look with the white ethnic groups, it certainly is the Irish who dominate. And as the Irish begin to dominate, then you have these, the next wave of immigration. So you have the Jews from Poland and Russia. And you can look at Abe Attell. He sort of begins this lineage which goes on for about 20, 30 years, and then, for various reasons, is completely forgotten and an embarrassment to Jewish people now, so that they don't even know there were probably 3,000 professional Jewish fighters at one point.
There's nothing that he wouldn't have done for money, obviously, He was there. Somebody once said to me, the only crime you can do in boxing is not make money, and Abe Attell was a great proponent of that philosophy.
Johnny had been a professional fighter just for a couple years. He hadn't lost, and he was very prominent in the Cleveland area, but also becoming nationally prominent. And he got a fight with Abe Attell for the championship in Kansas City. He was still very young and ultimately lost that fight, but he learned a great deal. He learned that he had confidence and that he could actually become world champion.
Johnny had put up a great show against the champion, and his first defeat in a boxing ring did very little harm to his reputation. Indeed, there was a clamour for a rematch, which was eventually made for the 22nd of February 1912 in Vernon, California.
It was interesting because when they left Cleveland to go prepare for the fight, Johnny took his wife and his daughter, Jimmy Dunn took his wife and his daughter. That was very unusual for the time. People really respected that. It was something very different.
Back in 1912, a world title fight was big news. There were only 8 weight divisions and one recognised champion at each weight. So when one of these men put their title on the line, it was a major event. Such was the interest in boxing that motion picture companies competed for the rights to cover these fights. And many of the sport's seminal moments have been preserved on reels of precious film. For nearly a century, however, it was believed that the great featherweight showdown between Attell and Kilbane was a contest that was lost to future generations forever. Then came a dramatic discovery.
I received a call from Frank Stallone, who I correspond with once in a while, and he said he found this film of Kilbane and Attell. The first thing was I was a little skeptical because films from that time period, 100 years old, usually don't exist anymore because they're made of nitrate and they dissolve and they're gone. So I didn't have much hope for it to be transferred. But I remembered a guy who was involved in that process from years ago who did all the films of Dempsey and Lewis. And he was actually able to transfer the film to video.
Attell was a native son of California. I was almost a stranger in a strange land. Even though I was in tip-top shape, Attell was still the champion. I had been told by so many that he was unbeatable.
When you had the great ethnic melting pots of New York and Chicago, San Francisco, you had these cheek by jowl neighborhoods. Really, the Irishmen did grow up with the Jews. Everyone learned to fight. It was great promotion, great business, box office. I think if they could find a wonderful Jewish fighter, find an Irishman, they would sell that with all the lowest common denominator advertising tricks you can imagine. Stuff it was too politically incorrect to say today was certainly said back then.
Johnny Kilbane, he has presence of mind, obviously, during the fight. You have to, or you could, make one mistake and be gone. During one of the mid-rounds, apparently he slips in his own corner on water. They're dousing him with water in between rounds and trying to revive him from the heat and the punishment. And then he goes forward and grabs Abe Attell in a clinch, and you can see him turning around. Of course, it's a silent film, but he apparently said, "Hey, clean that up." He could have slipped and tore up a knee. A lot of things could happen on a wet canvas.
The funniest thing that was never proven or accounted for was that, they often wipe down a fighter's back because it's easy to slip. And the Kilbane people said that Attell's back had been covered with chloroform, so that when they did clench, Kilbane would get full chloroform and knock himself out. Now, Attell always said that was BS because I would have knocked myself out first. I would have got it on myself.
Johnny's style was a boxer's intelligent, analytic boxer. So he made out the kind of style that would beat the champion. And that was jab and run, box at long range, don't allow the guy draw him into a major roughhouse fight, although he did try to do that on many occasions, and he kept talking to Johnny during the fight, trying to upset him.
Toward the end, Attell begins to employ all the darker arts, which is healing and butting and catching a guy in the clinch and trying to break his elbow.
But he was as cool as a cucumber, and he won it quite clearly in the end.
It was very clear to everybody that was there, and the referee particularly, that Johnny was faster, he was more clever, he was more skilled as a boxer. The newspapers really had an account of Johnny winning that fight and every round.
When the referee lifted my arm and proclaimed me champion, the crowd was all for me. I didn't seem to realize it. It was all so new.
The stature of Abe Attell at that time, he was considered one of the great boxers of all time, even that early in the century, and then Kilbane coming in there and upsetting him was a big surprise.
In a way, there's a perfect example of secession. You have Abe Attell, a Jewish fighter, 11 years undefeated as a feather, and now goes to an Irishman. So, two Hall of Famers, and that's very rare to see that two guys at the top of their game are going to meet.
We started back about 2 weeks later, and all went well until we hit Syracuse, Kansas. There we ran into a snowstorm that held us up for nearly 2 days.
March 17th being St. Patrick's Day, everyone was hoping that, the champ would be home on St. Pat's.
Finally, on March 17th, a Sunday, we reached Cleveland, and what a reception. The town was painted a rich green for its Irish champ.
Over 200,000 people greeted him when he arrived into Cleveland. It's the largest gathering for anybody in the history of the city.
I guess in all the confusion and the hysteria over his return, there was an 8-year-old Cleveland boy who was hit by a car. And the little boy said, "Oh, don't take me to the hospital. I must see Johnny, I must see Johnny."
But obviously it was in the best interest of the boy to go to the hospital. So Johnny heard about this story, and the next morning, the first thing that he did, he actually went down to the hospital to visit the little boy. And then on the way out, he gave the nurse some money to buy the boy a new suit. His clothes had obviously been destroyed by getting hit by a car. So the boy was fine, he survived, but I think it speaks to, again, Johnny's the type of person that he was, and that even though he was the world champion, he still cared about the people in his community and wanted to take care of that little boy.
Johnny was champion of the world, and he wasted little time in cashing in on his newfound fame. And as was the custom at the time, that meant leaving the prize ring to tread the boards.
I possessed what would presume to be called the inherent luck of the Irish for the stage. We decided to go back to Cleveland, but take the journey leisurely, playing a few theatrical engagements along the way. As a child, working on the railways, I dreamed of performing on the stage. Now here I was, another dream fulfilled.
Fighters and the stage go back a long, long way. The vaudeville stage was very important because you could go on, a fighter, tell a brief monologue they'd prepare for you, something about your fights, maybe an amusing anecdote. We're talking about a day in which a lot of people did not know what a lot of these celebrities looked like. And it was, frankly, for fighters, it was an easy way to capitalize on their fame and championship. And in those days, everybody, it seemed, was scrambling to make a buck.
When he won the title against Abe Attell, Johnny earned $3,500 for that fight. And Attell earned, he was the champ, he earned $6,500. But right after the fight, Johnny stayed in California and he was getting $2,000 a week to do a vaudeville act. So for a couple weeks work on vaudeville on the boards, he made more money doing vaudeville than he did for the fights, than winning the title.
Johnny was Cleveland's first world champion, and the area in which he lived was dubbed Kilbane Town, and it remains Kilbane Town to this day. As champion, Johnny travelled throughout the United States, taking on hometown favourites and putting his title on the line against leading contenders. But then, at the height of his career, the United States entered the Great War, and Johnny heard the call.
All through the war, I did not have one professional fight. I decided that the Army needed someone to teach it to box. I spent 22 months in the Army training the troops as a lieutenant and became known as the father of boxing in the Army.
During World War I, General Pershing and the military championed boxing as a wonderful way to build manliness and spirit and athletic fitness for fighting men. So after the war, there were various campaigns to legalize boxing in various states. And when that happened, beginning in the early 20s, there was a sea change. Boxing is now fully legalized. New York, they allowed 15 rounds to a decision by 2 judges and a referee. And quickly, this New York-style commission was adopted in a lot of other places.
The war was over, boxing was booming in America, and life was good for Johnny Kilbane. But then, in 1919, tragedy struck.
Little Helen's health was fine until she was 6 years old. Then she strained her little side and contracted an illness that eventually affected her little heart. When her true condition was realized, I was beside myself. We were living at our West 105th Street home. I had 27 physicians to care for her, but none seemed to help. 2 weeks later, little Helen died. To lessen the sorrow, I plunged into work, just to be able to forget, not my departed little girl, but the sorrow of her going.
The loss of his daughter was soon followed by the breakdown of his relationship with the man who had been in his corner throughout his fighting career, Jimmy Dunn, and it was a very troubled Johnny Kilbane that returned to the ring in September 1921 for a fight with Englishman Danny Frush.
At the opening bell, Frush rushed at me and ripped off a couple of low blows which I am certain were foul ones. I became incensed and yelled at him, All right, if you want to use those tactics, I will too. I let him have it with everything I had in the same way he was giving me.
Fighting on a hot September afternoon in Cleveland, the bout was an ill-tempered affair after a dramatic and very controversial first round in which Frush claimed that Johnny's knee struck him well below the belt.
To disprove this for those who were not at the fight, let me add that when the second round came, Frush had the better of it. He won the round handily, 2-1. Surely a boxer fouled in the first round would have a tough time winning the second one.
But Johnny was one of these guys who would take you by surprise. He was so smart and so fast, these punches would come up an uppercut. He would, an innovator, he would use punches that had never been seen before and try it out. And in that kind of a case with Frush, that's exactly what happened.
Frush visited the canvas with increasing regularity as the rounds went by, until Johnny finally knocked him out in the 7th.
Frush tried to get them to reverse the decision. Of course, there was never anything in the commission ruled against him. He was just the victim of a punch he didn't see coming.
It was now 1923, and Johnny was the last of the great pre-war champions still standing. He had been out of the ring for 2 years when he was lured back to defend his title against Frenchman Eugene Creaky.
There's no doubt that Creaky was an amazing man. He'd had his jaw shot away in World War I, had it replaced by a metal jaw. He was therefore literally the iron-jawed fighter. He was a very hard hitter. He started as a flyweight when he turned pro.
Creek had won the European title the year before, and he had defended it 3 times before the end of that year, and he had stopped all his opponents, so he was in the top class condition.
Johnny had held the title for 11 years and had taken over 140 professional fights, and in the early rounds he looked a class apart from the challenger. But, as is the way in boxing, time catches up with old fighters, and by the 6th round, the grey-haired champion was a beaten man.
By the time he was ready to fight Creaky, Kilbane realized he'd laid off too long. He really didn't have it anymore. It was sort of a foregone conclusion. He knew he was going in to go out on his shield.
He was only knocked out twice. One time was to Benny Leonard, and the other time was when his last fight when he lost the title to Eugene Creaky. And the first time he got knocked out, he had a talk with Irene, and she was very worried about him. And so he promised that if he was ever to get knocked out again, that was it. He wouldn't continue fighting.
It wasn't my day. He caught me with a wild swing and I dropped. I was not out. I heard the referee count to 5, and that was the last I heard. I was not hurt, but I have no alibi. I only wish the best of luck to Creaky. The ring has been kind to me, and it's a wise fellow who knows when he has had enough. I hope I am credited with having some wisdom.
Johnny's wife Irene had always been uncomfortable with boxing as a way of earning a living, and he was never going to break his promise to hang up the gloves when he started to get hurt. Unlike most fighters, when Johnny retired, he stayed retired.
She would go to all his fights, but she would never watch the fights. She felt it was important to support him, and he felt it was important to have his family with him. So she would prepare his meals and make sure he was prepared and take care of the family, but she just couldn't bear the sight of him being in fights.
Johnny had already prepared for retirement while he was still champion. He'd bought a farm in Vermilion in upstate Ohio, which he originally used to train for his matches. When the fighting was over, the farm became a training camp where visitors paid to get fit at the hand of the former champion of the world.
I built a temporary house and gym and cultivated the grounds. It is a beautiful place, and the family goes there in the summer months to get back to nature, as it were.
Johnny, like most of America, lived the good life during the Roaring Twenties, but in 1929 the party was over. The stock market crash wiped out Johnny's fortune, believed to be more than $1 million, and it also took away his farm. All that he'd fought for in the ring was lost, and it left Johnny a very different and certainly a more cautious man. The days of speculating were over, and Johnny moved his family into a house he rented in Cleveland. It had taken just a few bad investments to wipe out all Johnny had earned from the thousands of punches he had taken in the ring.
When you're a fighter and initially all you're interested in is what they do in the ring, but then when you get a bit older you get a bit more mature and think about, well, what did they actually do after the ring? When the ring career was over, were they able to distinguish themselves? Were they able to hold themselves in good stead? Were they be able to provide for their families? Because so many of them, sadly, the old pattern was rags to riches, back to rags again.
Johnny got through the dark days of the Great Depression by refereeing fights, teaching physical fitness, and putting on boxing shows in his West Side neighborhood.
St. Pat on West Park had the only gym on the West Side. While we were in the 7th and 8th grade, Johnny would come in and do the phys ed with us, and he would teach us how to box. And then all the women got together and says, Mrs. Gallagher, Mrs. McCarthy, Mrs. McCafferty, and things like that, I don't want my boy to learn how to box. Johnny says, hey, well, that's all right with me. But he still put on the shows on Saturday night. Of course, this is the Depression. They would come from all over the city. The boxer would get something like $10 for boxing. You know, that was a big money, $10. You know, and you paid so about $2 to get in to watch him box.
Eventually he developed an interest in politics and became involved in politics. First he ran for sheriff in the Cleveland area. That was unsuccessful. He always believed it was because he used his given name, John Patrick Kilbane, and the public knew him as Johnny Kilbane from his fighting. So he legally changed his name to Johnny Kilbane and learned that was the way to be successful in running for politics. So the next time he ran for the state senate, he was successful and became a state senator. He did that for several years until the early 1940s when he got elected to the clerk of courts in Cleveland.
When John Kilbane became clerk of courts, he became clerk of courts of the city of Cleveland court system. Generally speaking, the clerk of courts is responsible for all the records that are involved in a court, from all the filings, all the case files, the records, everything that's involved in a case. We judges would not have a justice system, nor would parties be able to litigate their disputes without a good clerk of courts. So for him to have been chosen for this position, I think says something about him, certainly.
Under Johnny Kilbane, we had a great leader. Very easy to work for. He was very firm, but he had a big heart, and he was very good to his employees. He always helped them out if there was a problem.
Johnny's term as clerk of courts in Cleveland was a sign of things to come, as the Irish and Achill Islanders in particular played an increasingly prominent role in the city's judiciary.
The number of judges, and frankly the number of judges with not only Irish roots but Achill roots, is extraordinary in this area. I mean, we have, just on this court alone, we have Boyle, Kilbane, 2 Gallaghers, Kehoe, Conway Cooney. Just out of 12 of us, I think 7 or 8 of us, Boyle, we have a number of Irish judges, all with roots or ties to the Achill area. So it's quite phenomenal.
There are some groups that can't seem to have traction in improving, but you can see from Johnny Kilbane, he always had the thought, and that's why he had the fighting heart, that he would succeed.
Johnny Kilbane died on the 31st of May 1957. He was 68 years old. Just 3 months later, Irene, his wife of 47 years, also passed away.
If I look back on it, it's one of those stories where couples are so in love that you know, when one dies, the other dies very soon after, just perhaps of a broken heart. Johnny always said that he had a very happy life, and he would say 99% of it is due to my wife Irene, and the other 1% is due to the luck of the Irish.
In the summer of 2012, Johnny's great-grandson, Kevin O'Toole, returned to the family's roots on Achill Island. His visit was part of a festival to celebrate the centenary of Johnny winning the featherweight title. In many ways, Kevin was retracing a similar journey undertaken by his great-grandfather while he was still champion of the world.
Harry made a tale out of Chihuahua, 1912. Agus we met Jamley and the Guish, then Johnny Kilbane and boxer the Hackett. We can't bug on cans for you. You know, physical now him no go welcome me. I'll hold my good shaka bug and not a Hanneke ahead.
My great-grandfather was a man called John Mangan, and his wife's name was Rose. Now, Rose was a Kilbane, and from what I can figure out, she was a cousin of Johnny Kilbane's father. So I think that's where the relationship comes in. Word would have got to them that this Johnny Kilbane was coming home on holidays. He had travelled by car, and that he was accompanied by his wife and daughter. They knew he was a world champion, and they were shocked and surprised when they seen how small he was and how light, because they were expecting probably a giant man, you know. They couldn't believe how well dressed he was, and that he was real smart with a suit, hat, and apparently an overcoat. It has been said that when Johnny came to the village, I did hear this, that all the people around there were very poor, and most of them would have had large families. And when they seen this well-dressed man and obviously doing well for himself, people seen the opportunity to send their own children off to America with him, and probably asked him would he adopt them, you know. But from what I hear, Johnny wouldn't have taken him up on that offer.
And just like Johnny had done on his visit, Kevin called in at Patton's pub, close to the Kilbane family homestead.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, Kevin. This is Pete Kilbane.
Peter. Hi, Kevin. Everybody here to Achill today, and special home of your great-grandfather.
Thank you.
Our hero.
To me, one of the most meaningful parts was going to the old church at Kildown Cemetery and seeing the grave sites of relatives and understanding that that's where my relatives and history was. Appreciating the fact that many, many generations of my family, that's where they came from. It was really a wonderful experience for me to see that and to gain a better appreciation for that aspect of my family's history.
O Donald go Calais, is later reichen noch. Na la shame was freen and I could hold near what the lonesome law. Is cooks long worth and ran out, was gonna actually delay. Yeah, for mother banner around and look cool in his world. Oh, Tancaro, I just copy, the Piata come forward.
I equate from my life experience of a success looking back on someone like John Kilbane, I think of John F. Kennedy. John Kennedy came on the scene. Every young person my age and older who was from an Irish background was enthralled with the fact that we could have an Irish president. And certainly, I'm sure at the turn of the century, when a young boxer named John Kilbane achieves this level of success, what a spirit of importance that must have instilled in the people that had that background. To be Irish and have a world champion in your midst from your community really is something to be proud of.
Nat Fleischer, the esteemed founder of Ring magazine, ranked him in the top 10. There was no doubt Kilbane was among the top featherweights of the first quarter of the 20th century.
It's always difficult to say how you can compare one era to another, and people would say, well, how would Mike Tyson have done against someone like Muhammad Ali, or how would Joe Louis have done against someone like Jack Johnson back in the 1920s. In the pantheon of world, not just featherweight champions, but right through the weight division, would definitely rank among one of the best fighters of all time.
He was the king of it at that time. Johnny would have been considered Cleveland boxing because he revived it, he inspired it by performing and being the example he was and proving that some skinny little kid from the Angle took on the greatest fighters of his era and beat them, and then inspired all these other guys in the neighborhood to take a try at professional boxing. And he did it, and he was the man.
He was a champion. He was well revered in the city of Cleveland, not only for his boxing ability, but his personality, his kindness, his generosity. He was a great gentleman, and we'll always remember him.
Johnny Kilbane was like a boxer, and he knew what to do. I mean, he knew when to throw the punch, hold the punch, and block the punch. And that's the way he lived. This is, to me, what sum him up is, if you let your guard down, they're going to beat the living daylights out of you. But Johnny Kilbane never let his guard down. That's knowledge right there of life itself.
Historic events o'er the world wide, they all seem to coincide. In 1886, Michael Davitt Bridge was constructed at Achill Sound. In Paris, France, in 1889, they erected the Eiffel Tower. And in Cleveland, Ohio, the heart of it all, John Patrick Kilbane was born. Now life was tough in the angle then, survival the name of the game. So he acted and danced, played his fiddle and sang, then a pugilist he became. In that fateful year, 1912, the Titanic it springs to the mind. California on February 22 was a fight of a different kind. Kilbane, young pretender to boxing's high throne, was to prove all the pundits wrong. For when Johnny climbed into the boxing ring, he fought fiercely from gong to gong. And now to conclude and to finish this ode, may his spirit forever prevail, as we open our hearts and give rousing acclaim for the pugilist Johnny Kilbane. Sinead.